Every morning at precisely 8, Clara left her small apartment on Willow Street, a cup of steaming coffee in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. The city was just waking up. Shop shutters creaked open, the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery, and the cold air made her cheeks pink. She always passed through the park before heading to the library where she worked. It was her favorite part of the day, quiet, golden, filled with the hum of life beginning again. That's where she first noticed him, a thin, silver-haired man sitting on the same wooden bench near the fountain, surrounded by pigeons. His coat was old but neatly buttoned, his hat slightly tilted, and his eyes, pale blue, almost translucent, watched the world with a kind of patient sadness. He struggled with the bag of birdseed that morning, his fingers trembling as he tried to tear it open. Without thinking, Clara stopped. "Here, let me help," she said gently, taking the bag from him. He looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Ah, thank you, miss. These fingers aren't what they used to be." She poured a handful of seeds into his palm, and the pigeons gathered closer. They sat for a few minutes in silence, watching the flutter of wings. Before leaving, Clara told him to take care and went on her way. The next morning, he was there again. And so was she. Soon, it became their quiet ritual. Clara would bring him a cup of tea from the bakery, 2 sugars, just the way he liked it, and he would tell her stories from his youth. How he'd once played the trumpet in a small jazz band. How he met his wife, Margaret, at a dance in 1953. How they used to visit this very park every Sunday, long before the trees grew tall. Clara listened with genuine warmth. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes her eyes glistened when he spoke of loss. She learned his name was Mr. Harrison. He lived alone in a nearby apartment, his family far away. He often said she reminded him of someone, though he never said who. As autumn deepened, Clara started bringing him a scarf, a thicker blanket, small things she thought might keep him warm. She never imagined how deeply those simple acts of care would soon intertwine their lives, or how one quiet friendship would turn into something that changed everything. 3 days. That's how long the bench stood empty. The pigeons still gathered, pecking at the ground, but the old man who always fed them was gone. Clara lingered each morning longer than usual, pretending to read the headlines while scanning the park for that familiar gray hat. On the 4th morning, she couldn't bear it anymore. She went into the bakery and asked Mrs. Lang, the owner, "Have you seen Mr. Harrison lately? The gentleman who sits outside with the pigeons?" Mrs. Lang frowned. "Oh, poor dear. He fell last week near the post office. An ambulance came for him. I heard he's at St. Mary's Hospital." Clara's stomach sank. She spent the rest of the day distracted, her mind replaying every morning they'd shared, every laugh, every tremor in his hands. When her shift at the library ended, she didn't go home. Instead, she took the bus to St. Mary's. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. At the reception, she hesitated, unsure what to say. I'm here to visit a patient. Mr. Arthur Harrison," she murmured. The nurse glanced up and smiled gently. "Room 217. He'll be glad to see someone." When she entered, the room was dimly lit, the steady beep of a monitor filling the silence. Mr. Harrison lay in bed, paler than she'd ever seen him. But when he opened his eyes and recognized her, the faintest smile appeared. "Miss Clara," he whispered hoarsely. "You came." "Of course I did," she said softly, setting down a paper bag. "I brought you your favorite tea. Though it might not be as good as the bakery's." He chuckled weakly. "You're too kind." From that evening on, she came every day. Sometimes she read aloud. Old poetry, bits of the newspaper, stories she thought he'd like. Other times she simply sat by his bed, holding his hand when the pain made him close his eyes. The nurses began to assume she was his granddaughter, and Clara never corrected them. It almost felt true. Once, when the rain tapped softly on the window, he said, "You remind me of Margaret. Always worried about everyone but herself." Clara smiled, blinking back tears. "Then I'll take that as a compliment." The hospital room became their new park bench, a place of quiet kindness, where time slowed, and care needed no reason. She didn't know then that those days were among his last, and that her gentle presence would be his final comfort in a world that had already started forgetting him. A week after Mr. Harrison's passing, the world felt quieter to Clara, emptier somehow. The park bench still stood beneath the bare trees, but it seemed lonelier now, as if it too were waiting for him to return. She still passed it every morning, unable to stop the small glance she gave the empty space where he used to sit. Sometimes, she caught herself slowing down, half expecting to hear his voice say, "Morning, Miss Clara." But only the wind answered. The funeral was small, painfully small. Just a priest, 2 nurses from the hospital, and Clara. She wore a plain black dress and held a single white lily. When the priest spoke about kindness and remembrance, she thought of his trembling smile, the way his eyes had softened when he spoke of Margaret, and the sound of his quiet laugh when she mispronounced the name of some old jazz musician. She placed the flower on the coffin and whispered, "You weren't forgotten." "Not by me." A few days later, a letter arrived in her mailbox. The envelope was crisp and official looking, her name neatly written in careful cursive. For a moment she feared it was some kind of mistake. Inside was a note from a law office requesting her presence for the reading of Mr. Harrison's will. Her heart pounded. Why would he mention her? She wasn't family, not even a neighbor, just someone who had stopped to help. When she arrived at the lawyer's office, the room smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. A middle-aged man in a gray suit smiled kindly. "Miss Clara Evans?" he asked. She nodded. "Mr. Harrison left you something." He handed her a small, square box wrapped in brown paper, along with a folded letter. Her fingers shook as she unwrapped it. Inside was a vintage gold locket, slightly tarnished but still beautiful. She opened it and saw a faded photograph, a woman with soft eyes and a warm smile. "Margaret." The note, written in fragile, uneven handwriting, said, "For Clara, who reminded me that kindness still exists in this world. You gave an old man company when everyone else had already said goodbye. I want you to have this, Margaret's locket, as a reminder that small acts of care can outlive even time itself." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She pressed the locket to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't about the gift. It was about being remembered, about knowing that her kindness had mattered to someone who had spent so long unseen. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of pigeons cooing. For the first time since his passing, Clara smiled. The peace that had settled over Clara in the days after receiving Mr. Harrison's locket was delicate, like a thin layer of frost that could melt at the slightest touch. She wore the locket every day, tucked beneath her blouse, close to her heart. It wasn't jewelry to her, it was a promise, a quiet reminder of friendship. Of mornings filled with stories and laughter. But one cold afternoon, a sharp knock at her door broke that fragile calm. When she opened it, 3 men stood outside, one young, tall, and severe-looking, and 2 in stiff suits holding leather briefcases. "Miss Clara Evans?" the young man asked curtly. His tone was polite, but his eyes were distant, appraising. "Yes," she said cautiously. "I'm Daniel Harrison," he replied. "Arthur Harrison was my grandfather." Clara's heart skipped. She'd never met his family. The old man had rarely mentioned them, only once saying they were busy with their own lives. "I see," she said softly. "I'm very sorry for your loss. Your grandfather was." He cut her off. "We're here to discuss a matter regarding his will." He nodded toward the lawyers. One of them stepped forward and handed her a folder. "It appears you were bequeathed a personal item belonging to Mr. Harrison, a gold locket. My client believes this inheritance may have been obtained under questionable circumstances." Clara blinked, stunned. "What? No. There must be a misunderstanding. He gave it to me. He wanted me to have it." Daniel's expression didn't soften. "My grandfather was old, confused. We have reasons to believe he was manipulated." The word struck like cold water. "Manipulated," she repeated, her voice shaking. "I never asked him for anything. I just helped him. He was alone." The lawyer spoke again, his tone mechanical. "Unless the item is returned, we'll be forced to pursue this matter legally. We trust you understand." They left as abruptly as they'd come, leaving her in the doorway clutching the papers, her chest tight with disbelief. She sank onto the couch, staring at the small locket resting in her palm. The thought of returning it felt like tearing away a piece of her heart. That night, sleep wouldn't come. She replayed every memory, every morning in the park, every smile, every whispered thank you. The world suddenly felt cruel, eager to twist kindness into something selfish. The next morning, she walked back to the park, the locket still warm from her touch. The bench stood empty beneath the pale light. She sat down, breathing in the cold air, and whispered, I know what we had was real. Whether or not anyone believed her no longer mattered. The world could accuse, but it could not erase what was true. As the first pigeons fluttered toward her feet, she smiled faintly and let the sun warm her face. The locket glimmered against her skin, not as a possession, but as proof that even in a world quick to doubt, quiet goodness still had the power to endure.